I'm Amy from Doodle Dog Designs.
Today I want to show you how I decided how big to make my barn quilt. I have another video showing you what materials I used and how I transferred the design to the wood and what kind of paints I used. So in this one I want to talk about size, and then I'll show you how we hung the larger two-piece quilt. When I first decided to paint a barn quilt for this barn, I wasn't sure what size to make it. I couldn't decide if I wanted to do a 4x4, a 6x6, or an 8x8, or something else in between. And I didn't want to just guess and hope that it was right. The materials are expensive and it takes a lot of time to make it, so I wanted to get it right. So this is how I set about making sure I got the right size for the barn quilt. And even if you're not going to make a barn quilt, this is a good process that you can use for other things if you're trying to decide the right size to fit in a space. The first thing I did was take a picture of the side of the barn where I want to hang the barn quilt, and then I imported it into my word processing program. I am using Pages because I'm on a Mac, but you could also use Microsoft Word or whatever word processing program that you have. And then I'm going to go ahead and enlarge the photo a little bit. I'm going to see how wide it is. I know that from one end to the other end is 40 foot. So I'm going to measure it in inches across here. And it is right about 8 inches. So I'm going to do a little bit of ratios. Bear with me, it's not hard, but it does require a little bit of math. First, I will calculate how large I should make a 4-foot barn quilt on this picture. So I have 40 foot. The width of the barn is to 8 inches. The width of the black rectangle I drew is equal to 4 foot is to an unknown. And since I want everything to be in the same unit of measure, I'm going to translate everything to inches. So 40 foot, to make that into inches, I just multiply 40 by 12 to get 480. And then 4 foot would be 4 times 12, so that's 48 inches. Basic algebra lesson here. When you cross multiply to find ratios, you multiply the numerator on one side of the equal sign, you multiply that by the denominator on the other side, and then you do the opposite and you make like an X of the two that you're going to multiply. You multiply 48 times 8, which is 384, and that equals 480 times X. To figure out how big I want a square here to represent a 4-foot barn quilt, now I have to get X by itself. So to do that, I'm going to divide both sides by 480. So X equals 0.8 inches. So I'm going to bring in this barn quilt here. This is the sample that I colored to get the coloring for how I want my quilt to look. Then I'm going to shrink it until its side is about 0.8 inches. So that's what it would look like. I think that's way too small. So I will try a 6 foot now. The 6 foot, I'm going to do it similar, so I'm going to have the 480 inches over 8 inches, and that's equal to 6 foot over X, and 6 foot is 72 inches. So I'm going to cross multiply 72 times 8, and that's 576. And then I'm going to divide by 480. It's 1.2 inches. So I will make this then 1.2 inches on each side. That's not a bad size. I kind of like that. I'm going to try it again with an 8 foot, and I'll see what that looks like. So again, I have the 480 inches over 8 inches is equal to 8 foot over X. And 8 foot, 8 times 12 is 96. So I'm going to multiply 96 by 8, and then divide by 480, and that's 1.6. Set this one aside. That's the 6 foot, and I'm going to make this 1.6 inches. And that's what an 8-foot barn quilt would look like. I think really either size would work, but I think I'm going to go with the 6 foot. The barn quilt is now painted, so now it's time to hang it on the barn. To attach the quilt to the barn, we used these screws. Since the barn quilt was going to be so high on the barn, and the quilt is 6 by 6, so we had a 4 by 6 piece and a 2 by 6 piece. So we knew it would be difficult to hold it in place and get all of the screws in at the same time. So my husband built 2 of these little braces. It's a piece of 2 by 4 and a 2 by 6. The idea is that the barn quilt can slide up under those and be held in place while he screws the quilt to the barn. To attach the braces to the barn, he removed some of the screws that were holding the tin on the barn and used those holes so that we didn't end up with extra holes in the barn. He spaced the braces appropriately and made sure that they were level. The next step was to slide the barn quilt into the braces and get it positioned just right, and then make sure it is level. This was not quite level, so he added a shim under one side. Then he measured and marked spots for the screws. He placed these screws at the same level as the pre-existing screws on the shed to make sure the quilt would be screwed into the frame of the building and not just the metal. He also made sure that all of the screws were screwed into the ridges on the side of the barn. He drilled holes and then screwed in the screws. He repeated this process with the second part of the quilt. By the end of this project, he was wishing his ladder was about 6 feet longer.
Be sure to click the like button and subscribe below. I'll see you next time. Bye.